Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Quiet on the set. All right, quiet on the set.
It is a Havre de Grace Decoy Museum original. Meet the Carver Series. In this episode, Jim Pierce. All right, so this is a pretty cool concept, an idea that the Havre de Grace Decoy Museum has come up with. It's a series, a sit-down series that takes place on the second floor at the Decoy Museum. If you haven't been to the Decoy Museum, you got to get there. Their webpage is decoymuseum.com. So, yeah, it's on the second floor, and this is the inaugural, did I say that correctly? Inaugural episode of the series featuring Jim Pierce. And something a little different here, too, is this is actually an edited video. We have to rewind a second and thank our good friends Scott Moody and John Paxton for taking the time to record all of this on January 12th, the year 2020, this past January. Little bit of a issue, the very last 10 minutes. Very last 10 minutes. One of the cameras stopped, so the audio is not the best. The wireless mic was not working, so when you hear a change in the audio, I apologize for that, but not a whole lot I can do for that right now. So, but again, yeah, it's a cool concept that the Havre de Grace Decoy Museum has come up with to record a little bit of history, if you will, as carvers, talk about what they love to do, and reflect on a little bit of history of what has taken place in their lifetime. So, got all kinds of noises going on here. Without further ado, I'll try it one more time. Without further ado, let's get to it. I do appreciate you listening and taking the time. As always, thinking of you, we are.
I am Carrie Knisley, the executive director here. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to Jimmy and Charlie and JK for assisting us in this process. I am going to allow Mr. Pierce to tell the stories, to introduce himself. But without further ado, the legendary Jim Pierce.
Well, a lot of you know me and some of you might not know me, but I was born in Havre de Grace in 1934 on Stoke Street, and all I'd do was jump over the fence and I was at the river. And the town then was nothing but a water town. We had 17 commercial fishermen here that worked the water, pound nets and things, and you never thought it would ever come to the end of the fishing industry we had here and the canning industry. It all went by just like everything else does. But I'll get back to Havre de Grace a little bit because I want to start here. When Havre de Grace was first, before in 1875, when it was incorporated into a town, it was called Hammertown, then Lower Ferry, and the Upper Ferry was at Lapidum, one over the Port Deposit. And Lapidum and Port Deposit was larger than Havre de Grace because the sailing ships come there, and they built a canal in 1840, opened the canal from Wrightsville to Lapidum, and then they finished it up and it came open to Havre de Grace. Until that happened, all the products, like the ships, the barges they were building that come down through the locks to haul grain, coal, and everything, they were being put on sailing ships and taken to all the other places. You know, the Richmond, Baltimore, and Havre de Grace had 10 coal companies handle coal. The river, you could go on a low tide in Havre de Grace, and I'd take you up there where the Route 40 bridge is right now and show you piling that were driven back in the early 1800s, clean down here to the lighthouse. But they never built big wharves. They would just put facer boards on them and catwalks out to them, because what would happen? Every spring, we had the spring flushes. And what happened? The ice tore everything down. And in a month, there was enough of labor, they built it right back up. As soon as the spring thaw went, they built them right back up because they had such a workforce here. Now, in 1850, there was only 1,300 people living in Havre de Grace. And everybody were watermen. I have paper in here, I got 100 boats from Havre de Grace, and the captains on them and everything, from Just Popper, you name it, that they used to haul products to Baltimore. And then the best thing happened in 1700s, the late 1700s, when they put the canal through to Chesapeake City. It was a small canal, but those boats could go through there and go to Philadelphia and Delaware Bay and haul products there. And then most of the people here, they just made their living off the water and hunting. But I want to start, what happened is, everybody knows where the nursing home is in Havre de Grace. That used to be a log pond. And they called it a log pond because they put a sawmill in there to saw lumber. Well, in 1820, that sawmill was in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. And the man that built it there was cutting the lumber and chain it all up and send it down the river in the spring with the ice and everything. And it was all busting open. So they had to put a boom crib out here to catch it, and they had to pay 4 to 5 cents a board foot to retrieve it, the people to retrieve it. So he moved the sawmill down here 3 years later and just sent the logs down. They started cutting right in Havre de Grace. But from 1820, and everybody's probably who haven't been to Cooperstown, New York, which is 427 miles from here, that watershed of the Susquehanna River, they cut everything with white pine. From there, the port deposit, they cut every piece of white pine, just stripped the forest. And they built boats out of them, hauled timber to Richmond, to all different cities back in. And then the trees grow back as hardwoods after the softwood trees. So that's why you look around here, there's plenty of white pine for the duck makers to make wooden ducks, because it was everywhere during those times. And then the canal, it only operated for about 12 years, because every year when they got the flushes in the river and the ice hammocks and stuff, we caved the walls in, and they had to refix them and all that. And it was, people have seen pictures of the port deposit, Havre de Grace. I got pictures of Havre de Grace, all the ice sheds tore down and everything. But they rebuilt them every year. And that went on up until they built Colonial Dam in 1917. And that saved, started saving the bay. And of course, climate has changed, over the years. Because when I was a kid, the best wintertime sport was ice skating and ice hockey and fishing, ice fishing. That's all gone now. Whoever thought you'd think, here it is January, what is it, 70 degrees out? Florida's going to get our weather, we're going to get Florida weather. But that whole Susquehanna Valley was mostly by farmers, but labor force was so cheap here. And then, of course, the town here, when I was a young man, we had 5 fish houses. There was 17 commercial fishermen here. And all of them lived in nice homes, all on Washington Street and everything, because they were all sea captains. And I got a list in here, could tell you every boat was made. The Maggie Poplar, Captain Jess Poplar was a captain on it. There's a list of it. Of all the boats, the Starlight, and there was over 100 and some boats, not counting the other ones that came up the bay. just hauling products. In the wintertime, they gunned. In the summertime, they hauled produce and products because around here was a lot of, in 1854, Stockham's Cannery, if you know where the Susquehanna River Railroad Bridge is, that was called, above that was called Little Italy, because Italians settled up in there. But before they ever came over here, that was all farmland, peach orchards. That's why he built the cannery. In 1854, he built the cannery, the canned peaches. And there was apples and peaches. They grew a lot of fruit. And he got in the canning business. Then after that, they started tomatoes. And every crossroad had a cannery because they didn't have no way to get it to the market except can it, you know. And I mean, you know, I didn't care which crossroads you want. The only thing they had a cannery, I mean, they scalded the tomatoes and picked them, put them in cans, and that was it. Well, everybody's heard of the red onion, I guess, in Havre de Grace. Well, that was a house of pleasure. And Alan Ferris likes history, and I love it. So he had it drawn up. But it's up on Otsego Street and the corner of Adams Street. But that was Seneca's father's farmhouse, and all up there, that was all farmland, clean on up, going up to 155, was nothing but farmland with peach trees and stuff, and that's why he got in the canning business. And then later on, the Italians came over here and settled in that area because of the stonework. They're all good stonemasons. They came here and a lot of stonework was going on. And then, you know, the quarries were here, Port Deposit granite, and you figure all ports, you know, they did all that kind of work. So that's what brought those Italians here. And then in Havre de Grace, after the canal quit operating because the trains came, steam engines. And everybody wondering about the steam engine. Well, that changed a lot of history. The steam engine, when does everybody think the steam engine was invented? In the 1600s in Egypt. They developed a steam engine to work water pumps in the coal mines. To pump the water out of the coal mines. But they were very dangerous. They didn't know how to control this, you know, the high steam bores and everything until 1725, and the company's still in business today, Watts. If anybody knows anything about furnaces or anything, if you buy valves or Watts valves and this and there, he made valves that would let the steam off at a certain temperature and everything. And that's when they developed the steam engine. Really got developed in the steam engine. Because, and then, 1788, John Flinch put the first steam bore in a boat in Philadelphia and used it to haul people on the Delaware River from Wilmington to Philadelphia. Everything for like 10 years. He put over 200,000 miles on that boat before it went. And then, but they were always having problems with regulating the steam. And then Watts developed a steam engine. Everybody says, Robert Fulton, you know, this here, and different ones. Well, Robert Fulton was the first man to put a steam engine, which was a Watts steam engine, in a paddle wheeler that was commercially used. That's where it comes from. But the steam engine was developed back in the 1600s. But then in the 1800s, they learned how to regulate the high pressure bore, the low pressure bore. And what comes along next? The railroads. Baldwin Motor Works in Philadelphia built the first railroad train. Then other people, I mean, you know, it's like anything else. Somebody gets in business, you're a contractor, well, I'll get in the contracting business. You know, any way to make money. They did it. Well, then the railroads come. Well, that took away from all these boats hauling products because those trains could haul more weight and everything, and faster, right to wherever they wanted to go. And then what happens after that? The trucking industry brings it right to your door. So that's why the history has changed so much there. But now let's get back to the town of Havre de Grace. When I was a kid, there was department stores here, 5 good department stores, 4 hardware stores, 3 shoemakers, 6 barbers, 40 bar rooms. There was 40 bar rooms. And in 1850, when he built the cannery, he built the Methodist church because the story I got that during the First World War, he was serving peaches and apples, selling them to the government, and so many people got sick off of them from being in the cans because they soldered the cans by hand and it put food poison in them. Until later on, he learned how to put a ring around the can, which he developed. That's where he made his money. But in Havre de Grace, we had a movie theater, bowling alley, and of course the railroad used to come down Pennington Avenue, and people have seen prints of that where it went out on a railroad track across the ice. That was in 1883. But you figure ice used to get 8 and 10 inches thicker better. That's when they used to cut ice here when it was, thick. But those cars weren't that heavy because they were wooden cars or wooden freight cars. They were light. And it used to be the passengers would have to get off at Havre de Grace. They would put the cars on a ferry to take them to Prairieville, and the people had to get a ferry to go to Prairieville to get on the train. They wouldn't ride them on the car there until in the late 1800s. They let them build a ferry that would take the cars and the people over, and then later on, the railroad came from Philadelphia to Prairieville. Then the Baltimore line came from Washington, D.C. to Havre de Grace. And then there was no bridge across there. They built the first bridge. When they built that in the 1800s, then it was a wooden bridge. Then they built a steel bridge. And of course, the one up there now, they're getting ready to build a new one. Well, I don't know if we'll ever see it because, but they've been working on it or drawing and had pictures of it and everything. But that railroad has changed everything because you can get on a train anywhere and go anywhere. But now we've lost a lot of railroad because there was a lot of little railroads. Every community first started waterworks. It was a small waterworks. Now everything, the government owns everything. But before, people were in that kind of business. I'm trying to think of the name of, in Elkton, his grandfather was a lawyer. He made decoys. I can't think his name. I know his name just as well because I knew his son because we used to come to Bob Litzenberg. But that family was so prosperous, they ended up owning a lumber yard right where the lumber yard is right there on Main Street and there and coming in on 213 because right below that was the Divers Boat Works, which they built, 300-foot ships there, and the water was deep. And that family helped more people because they figure if you keep people healthy, they are able to work. But if they're not healthy, they can't work. And labor forces were cheap. And it's the same way around here because we had to, we're divided north and south. And then when the Civil War come along, then there's when things really started changing, because that's when hunting really started to change. In the 1860s, they were making shotguns, but with domestic barrels. And domestic barrels are as strong as steel barrels, because I've been reading the history on it. All your greeners and all of them were made, but they were hammered so fine and welded together by heats that they would last them. They've been proof tested and everything. I read all this in history, and they still use them today. But of course now it's easier to make a barrel out of high strength steel or stainless or whatever, because they know the easy machine work, But before, and every town, there's just as many gun makers as there was decoy makers. If you read the books, there's 1 million gun makers and 1 million decoy makers. And Pennsylvania started it all. They had more gun makers in Pennsylvania than any other state. Then when everybody started going west, they took the Pennsylvania rifle, which they called the Pennsylvania rifle, and turned it into the Kentucky rifle, which that's all it was. And but Pennsylvania has more rifles. So then you figure hunting to make a living, you had to either had a flintlock gun or a percussion cap gun, we came along later. But in the 1840s, when they started building the double barrel guns, and then they found out they could build a steel brass cartridge to go in that gun. Most of them were still making 10 gauge and 12 gauge. Your big punt guns were just handmade anyway, because they weren't dangerous. The only thing that was dangerous about them, if the powder got wet, and the old powder they had back in them days wasn't like the ballistics we have today. The powder would get wet. So every time they went out at the gun with those big guns, if they didn't fart, that's why they had a ramrod with a corkscrew on it. They take the wad out and clean that gun out, because they were dangerous. Because some but they were just roughly made, except ones that were bought. The best gun I ever seen, I'm making a copy of it right now, came from Vandiver, Bob Vandiver, the Vandiver Inn. Bob Vandiver had a gun that was made in England, and it had engraving on it and everything. It was an 8 gauge. And I guess, I don't know if his father and family used it or not, but that was the only really good looking, factory made gun I ever saw. And that, of course, if you go to those factories, you see all kinds. But that's what happened. But then when they started making that double barrel, and you figure you're in a sink box out here on those flats shooting ducks, you pulled that trigger, and you had to take a ramrod, put powder back in it, and they had two guns in a box all the time, and sometimes they had somebody there to load them when they had a double box. But you had to do that until the shotgun shell came around, and the double barrels, you could break them and load them, and they injected the shells and everything. And that all happened right after the Civil War, because so many gun makers were trying to get contracts for the government to make guns. And the government bought so many different types of guns. This one didn't work. Somebody else makes something else. But here in the town, with all these commercial fishermen, and they fished here all winter, the ducks were here by the thousands. And this flats out here would handle 200 gunning rigs 3 days a week, except from November the 1st till January the 30th. Then from there, from January the 30th, they could gun on Saturday. They gun Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Then they could gun Saturday, clean up to March. And they set their own laws until the government put laws in effect. And even back then, I got a list here of how many sink boxes there were out on the flats, who owned them, and of course it was a rich man that owned those. They took the sports out. But I got over 100 bushwhackers here. They were bushwhacked, they bushwhacked the boat. The license cost them $5 then. And they killed more ducks bushwhacking, and the rich man didn't want them to gun out. They wanted them to cut bushwhacking out because they were killing their ducks. And it hasn't changed today. Still the same way. The rich man has a place to hunt. Everybody else got to find a place to hunt. It hasn't changed. But then, when they started making the steamboats, then all these rich people started having yachts made. And they were gunning from here to the Carolinas during hunting season. They just loved to hunt. And they could afford it. You know, and I, around here with the decoy makers we have, we're called Decoy Capital of the World, and there are so many different makers. We look at a body and say, well, this looks like a Holly, Taylor Boyd, this or that. You know, if they could just talk and they could tell us the whole story. But you'll see a different head on this one and that, because when my grandfather was living, and of course I spent a lot of time in Bob McGall's decoy shop, and that's one part about me. I knew Bob McGall, Madison Mitchell, Jim Courier, you know, and young Sam Barnes, and most of the Carvers around, you know, over, and they did one thing for during the off season. They made decoys because they were still buying them, and then really, after they cut the sink box out in 1930, the year I was born, everybody went to bushwhacking. You know, they went to bushwhacking. And then that's when they started refining the birds. Everybody says, well, these are crude. They only painted them black and white red. If a duck darted and saw what they were, then you better be dead. But then they started refining. You know, like Sam Barnes and all these people are putting feathers on the birds. You know, the angel wings, this and that, trying to refine a bird because the canvas bash came and sit in those decoys. So they had to be more lifelike for them to draw them birds. And you wonder where all of them went to, because every year, if there were 40,000, probably 10,000 got lost because of the grass and storms and stuff. So they were always replenishing decoys, somebody making them. Because when I was a young man, in my neighborhood alone, there must have been 10,000 decoys. And I had any pick I wanted. You know what I mean, over the years. I bought Ward Brothers for $35 a piece, and then couldn't sell them for $75 a piece or $50 a piece. Then when they were 65,000, I couldn't buy a pair for 70. I could sell them for 100. You couldn't do it. That's the way things go in life. But whoever knew waterfowl would ever become the history it did, because some of these birds have bought more than these fellows ever made in their lifetime or ever thought they were making. Because I'll tell you what, the Holly family, you know, they said it was grandfather decoy making here, and they were. And you figure in this town alone, right here where Jim Courier lived on the corner here, the Carrier house, but right here on this corner right here, these houses all been remodeled. You had Taylor Boyd lived there. You had Joe Dye. Then you had, think of his name anyhow, lived next door. And then you went right there, which they just left as a Havre de Grace, the Harry Moore property. And the Moore family, Captain Billy Moore was Bob McGall's grandfather, his father-in-law. And Billy Moore and his grandfather and his father and all of them, they were market hunters. That's what they did for a living. And when the ducks weren't here, You figure they gunned November, December, January, February, and March. 5 months they gunned. Then it was fishing season. Then they fished. And when the fish were gone, the shad fishing was over with, they packed fish and everything, they all started hauling freight. You know, the canneries are canning this and that, and they hauled to Baltimore. I read an article where a bug-eye, two-master bug-eye, and down Smith Island caught 5,000 bushel oysters in one day. And he sailed from there to the Baltimore Harbor to the cannery, and you know what they got a bushel for them? 4 cents a bushel for oysters. It's unbelievable.
Can we take a break quick, Kevin?
Yeah, I can take a little break.
Keep going. He said keep going.
All right. But, I mean, it's times of, you know, it's unbelievable what people did back in those days to make a living. I mean, I got pictures where the ice houses would be tore down, and as soon as ice left here, they had a labor force. Now it's just the opposite. The labor force costs more than the product. You know, I remember when I went, we would build a house for $25,000. The labor was only $5,000. Material was the rest. Now it's the opposite way. You buy $50,000 material, but the labor force is $150,000. Things have changed, and whoever knew an automobile would be the price it is today, that's more than a house is. You know, and in Havre de Grace, if you ride around these towns, I remember when they were building, because I worked at the post office, and every spring they would just bring rabbits, chickens. Everybody had chickens in their yard, and you know, you're not allowed to have that in town anymore. Well, in Havre de Grace, you deliver them every spring to people to raise chickens. They bought rabbits. They raised rabbits because it was a cheap commodity of food. You could raise. They ate pigeons. I eat pigeons. You know, when I was a kid, pigeons were good eating. They were all grain fed and everything, but that's the way it was. But then in Havre de Grace, it was 1885. There were so many wild goats in Havre de Grace and wild dogs that the town put a $1 bounty on them to kill them. There was so many of them wild in the city of Havre de Grace, and that's hard to believe. You know, why wouldn't they be killing the goats off and eating them? They probably, but there were so many of them, they put a bounty on them. And then when the homing pigeons came here, when they migrated, people were shooting windows out of the houses and everything. Then they put the law, you couldn't discharge a firearm in the town limits anymore. And that's back in the 1800s, because the homing pigeons were killed off in the late 1800s. You know, it's unbelievable. But that's people harvested for food. You know. And then, of course, things have changed now. The only place you can go anywhere to get a screw is Home Depot and Lowe's. And Havre de Grace, you had Hex Hardware, Pickcock, you had Lizzie Lumber Yard, and before that it was Coles. You know, 4 or 5 people changed hands over the year. And Ed Pearson, Decoy maker, he owned a lumber yard before he came Lizzie's. And but all that has changed now. And our canneries, I had a friend that grew nothing but vegetables in Jersey. He used to collect my decoys to come to the house and everything. And he got out of the raising produce and stuff because the canneries was costing too much to can, you know, transport and canning. Now he's back, he started growing flowers and everything. Well, then he got out of that because they started bringing these portable canneries right on the trucks. Pull in there and can your stuff right on your farm. Had the, the steamers and everything right in tractor and trailer. So he got back in the canning business because they could come right to you, can your products, and sell it for you. And that's how things have changed. But out here on the flats, every year these wharves tore down. But up to 1850s when the hunting was really got, because of the people were getting power boats made, and the sports were big around here. I mean, we have up in my shop, my son can tell you, Charlie, I have a friend, and he's Ronnie Adams, and Ronnie, I met him about 6 or 7 years ago. I knew of him, but he started doing books. He started doing research. He's got a heck of a decoy collection. And he's doing more history and found out more stuff about the families of Havre de Grace, and not only Havre de Grace, everywhere. Where they came from, what generation they were, who made the decoys, what they did for a living. And one of these days he's going to have 2 boundaries of books, but he has a source to do it. He works at the University of Maryland, and so he's got a lot of archives he can get into, you know what I mean? So he's finding a lot of history out because last night I read he did the article on Al Thomas. Now, some of you might not know Al Thomas, but he was a decoy maker and a boat builder. His family was in the boat build business. And if anybody know about Aberdeen Proving Ground, you look right down here and you see, if you look through the glasses or anything, you see the boat docks where the civilians had their boats and kept them down there. That was Langley Park. It was an amusement park. That's before the government ever took it up. People came there to picnic on Sunday and fish and rent a boats. And he had a boat yard there and everything. And his father-in-law owned the property, and that's what they did to make money. Then his house caught on fire and burnt down, and his boat shop, so he moved to bought a property in Aberdeen, but then he started his boat building business out here at the racetrack, there where Billy James's lives. If you can go right down the racetrack, there's a road goes right to the water. Well, he was over on if you go down, he was on the left-hand side. He built a boat yard there and a railway. And but he just finished his article up. But he made decoys, but he worked on boats all of his life. And that's what most of them did. They had to do something because, in the wintertime they made decoys. Summertime, and then also they had to make and repair nets for fishing. And the fishing industry was unbelievable here because I guess a lot of you have seen the fish floats that would go down the water and they pour the hull seines right up on the boats and be tons and tons of fish, of herring and shad in them, and rockfish. Now, where I was born at, Alice Mackin married George Pencil, has a Pencil's Marina. She lived right down back of me. Well, her father, he had pound nets. He had 13 pound nets off of Prairie Point. And he fished those pound nets, and they would take 20-some ton of perch and herring. One day it would be herring or perch, whatever, they mixed them. Took them to Tillman Packing Company to pack the roe. And then the rest of the fish, we would take and get it. And Russ Phillips was a great water family from down Tillman's Island, the Phillips family. In fact, his son and his nephew and his cousin died on a boat that he had built. Too much ice on it, ice fishing in the wintertime, because he built the first fiberglass boat and everything, big 53-footer. State of Maryland has it now. But anyhow, he fished those pound nets, and they hauled those fish down, and they could only haul so many because they would squash them. You know, they only put so many in a truck. But they did that for 2 months and hauled fish down there to pack. And now people cut the cans and all this. Now you're not allowed to catch a herring in the bay. You're not allowed to catch a shad. And I remember when you could dip all you wanted, wash tub after wash tub, and could get a penny apiece for them. And people smoked them, ate them. But now you don't have fish markets when there's no fish markets left around here. Because you go to a chain store, they got a bakery, fish market, doctor, eyeglasses, whatever you want. Banking, don't make any difference. So that's how things have changed. But the gunners out here, it was a tough life because it was ice, and Jim Courier, he used to ice box all the time. I had his ice box, and I gave it to John's mother because it come from his uncle, who lived right here on the corner here. And he ice boxed for 15 years, he told me, because he could make more money when the river was froze up and there'd be open pockets. He could go out on the ice and take a sled and pull the box and cut a hole in the ice where a hole was close by, and so half done decoys out and get past shooting and get a grappling hook and hook on the ducks, and he get $7 a pair. Before he was only getting $4, you know, and he get $7 a pair. What? $3 more is a lot of money, because I know when I was shooting ducks, it made me a lot of money. I mean, everybody wanted them, you know, because they're the famous duck there ever was, canvasback. But all the ducks were good. Didn't make any difference what you ate, mallard, but canvasback was the biggest duck out here on the flats. And people shot them. You know, you heard stories, they killed 500 a day, one man. You know what I mean? And so it's hard to believe when they said there were 6 million canvasbacks out on those flats at one time. And 40,000 decoys and 200 gunning rigs. And they gunned every day they could if the weather wasn't bad. And there's a story about Joe Dye. Joe Dye's father, he used to fish, gun Henry Diskin. Diskin Saw Works in Philadelphia, made the hand saws and power saws and all that. And Wanamaker, they were very good friends. They would rent his boat just to go duck hunt. It was a scow, sailing scow. And then young Joe Dye, and we got a tape of this, young Joe Dye was helping his dad with the sink box and everything. And the weather got a little rough and washed over the box, so they lost their guns overboard. And some decoys, you know, I mean, they couldn't go get the decoys the next day, part of them. Well, young Joe Dye took his clothes off and dove and got those 2 shotguns. And then the story goes that from then on, Joe went to Wanamaker's in Philadelphia and got all of his clothes every year free. And when his father died, and Joe didn't know this, and this is all true, we got it on tape. Joe didn't know this, but he called Wanamaker and Mr. Diskin that his father passed away. They paid all the funeral expenses and everything, and still sent his mother a check every month. He was actually on their payroll 12 months out of the year for over 30 years. He worked for the company, but he was just a waterman here, but they took care of him. And that's a true story. We got a tape on that when Joe was telling the story of it. And then, of course, all the other families, you know, the Hollies, but they had property. They ended up owning property and houses. But when you look at property, the house was only worth $300. You know, it was a lot of money, though, $300. He left the house to his one son, never left any to Jim Holly, because Jim Holly had his own house and a boat works, and he had $480 in the bank. So that was a lot of money then, you know, back those days. And because I can remember when I was a kid, you know, your parents didn't give you a whole lot of money. Well, after I was 12 years old, they didn't have to give me any money. I could make my own. But you could go to the grocery store and get a box of cereal for 17 cents. What's a box of cereal cost you now? You know, 5 gallons of gas for $1. So, and you know, most of the people here, you know, everybody had a gill and skiff because they shad fished, and they made money during fishing season. And then, of course, a lot of them pack fish a way to live on in the wintertime. But the duck hunting out here was, Ronnie has articles that from Warren Street, Pennington Avenue, if you go down there on a low tide, you can see where the ponds were, where the boat dock was built for the railroad, the cars, the ferry to pick up the railroad cars. Well, Donald Asher, when he was younger, had a blind there. He could kill canvasbacks off of there. Right on this point right out here, Jim Courier had a duck blind. I shot my first canvasback there with Jim Courier. He could walk from his house, go out there in the morning before he even went to work at the post office and kill a couple birds. They were just everywhere. And the thing was, the government, it's like anything else, once they get their hands into something, it destroys something. You know, in the 50s and 60s, there were still ducks around. And then what happened is all the farms around here were dairy farms or orchards. Well, then the little dairy farms were 50 acres, 60 acres, 40 acres, enough to make a living on. They canned their own food, milked their own cow, made their own butter, everything. And then what happened after the Second World War, the farmers come in and bought these little farms because the kids didn't want to farm. They were going to work in a factory where they could make $2 or $3 or $4 an hour. They weren't going to work on a farm 7 days a week, 365 days a week. So the grain farmer come in, and a lot of them were dairy farmers, but got into grain farming. And they started buying the little farms up. Then they took the hedgerows out, and that made the runoff for the water go, and the streams and everything, all that went to the river basin. And this is filled in out here, and if it didn't have Congolean Dam right now, it would be filled in more. Here's the government says, we got to dredge it, but there's too much minerals. Where's minerals come out of? The ground. Dredge it. Take it back to Harrisburg and put it in the coal mine. It's still got coal mines been burned up there for 300 years. Fill them back up and take another 75 years for it to get down here. You know, but too many people have their hands on it. And I just seen where, you know, last year they appropriated $2 billion to start the project. The power company did it. Well, we're paying for it. I mean, don't worry. But anyhow, the government still don't want them to do it because, well, you got to do something with it. And doing something is better than nothing. And that's the problem. But it saved these flats out here because when we had shad ditches out here. They called shad ditches. Were 12 feet deep or better. And that's when that ice hammocks would come down and plow them sandbars out. You have a sandbar, and there were cuts down through there. And that's where the wild celery was there. And then when we started body booting, everybody got on a sandbar and started shooting ducks when they cut the canvasbacks out because we had mallards, black ducks, and everything. And they were corn fed just like anything else because the fishermen put over probably 50 ton of corn over a year just for the fishing industry to catch carp and catfish. It's not like the day they have these ponds, they raise it, and you can go to market. Hell, I remember nobody would eat catfish around here. Now you go to market, they're $3, $4 or $5 a pound, but they're all farm raised, you know. But the fishermen dropped corn over, and that's where everybody did their night shooting at, on those corn halls, because ducks love corn. And if you would feed the corn the ducks right now, they'd be more healthier. And we could bring every goose back if we start leaving 20% of the corn out in the fields, just like it was in the 60s. When they started going to grain farming, we had 80% of the geese on the Eastern Flyway here in Maryland. And you could kill all the geese you wanted. Then after what happened, the farmer made the fields larger. The combines don't leave a drop of corn in there. The only way you see a corn is might be here and there where they load it on the truck. And it's not the farmer's fault, 'cause he's plowing right out to the road for one reason, because it's how much grain they raise. It's volume a day. You know, you couldn't have a little farm and do that, because I have a brother who got into, he was a gentle farmer, but he loved farming. He had over 10,000 acres, and he never farmed. An outfit out of Texas farmed it for him, planted it, harvested it and everything. He just got a check because it's big business. But that's what changed around here. And then what really changed things around here is they started draining all the potholes and everything up north to grow more grain, because the world was expanding. And you know, we're the breadbasket of the world. We produce more food than anybody else. And the thing is getting it to the market every day. And you know where it's going now. You figure, just us here, every time you go to the store, there's anything there you want to buy if you got the money. And you wonder how it gets to the market so fast every day. And that's worldwide. But then what happened here, what do we have? Mosquitoes. That was helped to ruin the flats. In the 50s, they started coming around and said, okay, the mosquitoes were so bad. They were. So they started spraying that DDT. They sprayed all the marshes with it, with the airplanes from University of Maryland. They had a contract to do it, and they ended up killing everything. It killed the eagles off, killed the songbirds, it killed all the plants off and everything. And once you destroy it, it doesn't get back. Now this water out here, it's clear, but it's dirty. When I was a kid, we could go gunning, I drank the water out of the river, never bother you. And it only got 65 degrees. Now it gets 70, 80 degrees because you built atomic plants, you got all this discharge from factories and plants and everything, and households, and the sewage to plants and everything like that. So it's all just revolves around the human nature of everything. And but they sprayed that DDT here. It killed the eagle. It killed everything, and nothing would come back here. It was nothing here. I'm not kidding you. It killed the grasses, and it killed the shad, everything off, and the heron, because of the pollution of the water. And now they have the state sends every spring, and I live up at Lapidum, I go down to the dock where we used to haul seine and catch tons and tons of heron. They go out there with a boat and have a trailer with water in them and everything, pumps on them. And they go shop fishing, pick up 10 fish, put them in there, tag them, they take them down the Potomac River to the fish hatchery and hatch them down there. They don't put them back here in the river here. They put them other places. But the water's too dirty. A muskrat won't live here anymore. And muskrat was a big business in the state of Maryland. You know, I mean, people trapped because of the fur, but also for the meat. And they were the cleanest animal there is. They would wash his food before he ate it. And everybody trapped for muskrats. They called it marsh rabbit. You used to be able to go in a restaurant down all the, trying to think the name of the restaurant, in Delaware. That was on our menu every February. They'd have marsh rabbit. And even today, there's a over Salem, New Jersey, the Flour Company has a muskrat dinner. Has over 300 people go to it. You can't get a ticket to it. I've been to it one time with Summers, Italy. You can't, it just goes from family to family. And all our muskrats come from Louisiana. They have a big muskrat cook-off over there. It's, you know, things have changed. But that's what killed the grasses out here, was the DDT. And Agent Orange, or whatever you want to call it. And they made tons of it at Aberdeen, at Edgewood Arsenal, because you had the Atlas chemical company down there, which is still there today, making chemicals. And, you know, we're burning chemicals and stuff like that. And then, of course, the gunners didn't have to worry too much about powder and shot, because Baltimore has the greatest shot tower that was ever built. It's in Baltimore City. It produced more shot for this country than anywhere else. And it still exists today, but doesn't do anything because they got other ways of doing it. But, and then powder, you didn't have to worry about it. Powder, Atlas Powder Company was right across the river at Prairie Point. Before Prairie Point was there, that was a powder company. DuPont's had the Atlas Powder Company. It was a Prairie Point. And then after the government bought that all out, and then they turned into a hospital after Second World War, you know. But up to then, you could get people wanted powder. They just went over there, Atlas, because I got wooden shovels. Everybody said, "What's a wooden shovel for?" To handle powder so it doesn't take a spark. You know, people say, you know, but that was here. But there was coal industry here. The city of Havre de Grace had a foundry, made iron back in the 1800s, because they were self-supporting. They had to be, you know. You had, I think there was 3 gunsmiths in Havre de Grace back in those days. I'd have to get the books and show you. But then there was, like me, there was 4 shoemakers in Havre de Grace. Now you just throw them away and buy a new pair. You know, but they made a living doing it. And then the farmers would come here to Havre de Grace because had good, nice department stores. On Thursday night they would bring chickens into Havre de Grace, and then on Friday night they come shopping. They get flour and stuff, because there was a lot of mills around, but they still went to grocery store and bought, you know, there was 17 grocery stores in Havre de Grace. On every street corner, there was a little grocery store in every community. It wasn't the big chain stores till the AMP was the first big chain store to come around here. Then the Acme, and they've changed hands so many times. Now it's all you have is big chain stores, control everything. And then, of course, with the flats here, there were more gunners came here than anywhere else in the world come here to shoot because of plentiful of ducks and because of the gun clubs. And they lived in first-class accommodations. Now, everybody knows, I mean, a lot of you aren't from Havre de Grace, but right up where Coakley's Pub is, and right across is Lyons Drugstore, the builders built a wedge. That was Bear's boarding house and bar and rooming house, had a restaurant there in 1840. And the rooms were booked from year to year for the hunters. And every house in Havre de Grace would take in boarders during the hunting season. And they served meals too, because it was extra income. They made it. And then, but that was a hotel. Then there was 4 hotels in Havre de Grace. They're all gone now. Just like in Charlestown. There was 2 motels in Charlestown, you know. But they were made there for sports. They were built for one reason. The sports come there to hunt in the wintertime, come there to fish in the summertime. When they built this here over here in 1917, that's what it was built for, hunting and fishing. And a guy named Pearsall built out of Philadelphia, and he run out of money, so DuPont finished it, helping one partners with him, and it closed down in 1965. My brother-in-law and daughter, his wife, got married over there and was the last meal served in there, because that was a beautiful restaurant in there. And then, of course, it got where it wasn't maintained, the floors were all wood, and the fire marshal had no sprinkler system, the old elevators, and all that, so they just sold it for $375,000, and then they made apartments out of it. But we know the grandsons, and they buy decoys from us, everything. From the Knott family, everybody knows the Knott family. They were in the blacktop business, construction business for years in Baltimore, all over the world. And his grandson is John Cornstein. We had him where's Pat at? Right here. Pat knows John very well. John was a grandson of the Knott family. They owned a Swan farm down at Rock Hall there. It was left to him and his sister, and he owns it. And his grandsons buy decoys off us and everything. But he got married at this hotel here and had his wedding reception here in 1920. And he used to come here because, they had steamboats came here and had a dock here and everything like that. It was fine dining and fine living. But John Cornstein, when we were getting the museum going, he's a history buff on the Civil War and everything. And you probably see him on TV and all that, because he's with I think John's semi-retired now. But he was a great man on Civil War, and down at Jamestown, museum at Jamestown and everything, he was there. And he came up here and got us started on our museum. I mean, paperwork and stuff like that. But it's funny how things go. But the hotel here stayed open until 1965, and then the city was going to tear it down, but it was given to the city by Dr. Foley. He owned it. And then, of course, he had nuns were living in there then, but then he built a new house and new quarters for them out at the Catholic Church for the nuns and the school. And he traded the city that property for the property across the street where you see the apartment houses are. He built new apartments there because he wasn't going to invest any money in that in the old place because it wasn't big enough. But then they converted into things. Then at the same time, when this was up for sale, the city was going to have it tore down. And it was going to cost them $3,700. That's what you could have bought this place for, $3,700. And of course, Alan Fair and Mitch Shank and Donald Ashner asked me, let's start a museum. Because I was involved with the Upper Bay Museum at Harvard's Fish House. We started that one in 1970, back there. And I was involved in that because I just wanted to serve the history on hunting. And the best part about the Northeast Museum, it's about the watermen. It's hunting, fishing, everything. This is all about decoys. And we're very fortunate to have the decoy makers we had because, you figure the Hollies Barnes's, Bernard's, Paul Gibson, Charlie Bryant, you know, and when we first started, everybody said, why are you getting these fellows? I said, look, they're still living. They're living legends, so that's why I try to start honoring them all. Then I said, then we can get, then it has changed, and Pat will tell you, a lot of it's been given to this museum of waterfowl, of the old waterfowl, and good quality birds. But everybody we've honored in here has put a collection in here, and it's one of the finest collections you'll find. And couldn't be located any better. Here's the flats where millions of ducks were killed. And then, of course, after this, what happened there is, you know, during the Second World War came on in 41, then, I mean, I remember when they put at the Route 40 bridge, that was finished up in 1941, and then tore the old double-decker bridge down that used to be going across Havre de Grace by the American Legion in Havre de Grace. And that was built by, and 5 men bought that from Havre de Grace, and they charged you 25 cents a toll to go over it and come back. They built a second deck on it. Well, the state found out they were making too much money, so they bought it back from them. So then they tore it down, and said they needed the metal, but they spent all that metal to build Route 40 bridge because we didn't have the roadways. You know, you only had Route 7, and Route 40 was the expressway until after the Second World War, when Eisenhower come back, because he'd been in Europe, seen the Autobahns, the roads they had over there, how fast they could go and everything. So that's when they started the road system in Maryland. It's when they built I-95. The first turnpike ever built was in Pennsylvania. And they only went out to the mountains. And the only reason they did that is because Rockefeller started to build a railroad going out there. He got into hard rock and couldn't get a tunnel through. So then he abandoned it because it was going to take too much money. Well, then right after that, the state of Pennsylvania went and put a tunnel through there and put the railroad through there. And that's going west. But that's what, you know, things have changed so much like that. And I like to read about the canals and the Susquehanna River. It had probably one, and probably in its history, it's probably had 10 or 12 spillways built in it. And spillways, they would stone it up so it would hold water so boats could float because it was too rocky. Up in, you see that all up in Safe Harbor, all different places. Then a lot of them's been knocked out now because they got bridges because the only way they had to go across the river, they had to flood it to make it so the boats could go across. You know, from Wrightsville over to there or Lancaster or whatever. You know, so that was all the way on the river, and then they tore a lot of that out. Well, my grandfather said and he was born in Lancaster County, he said it didn't make any difference. In spring, they could take lumber they had piled up and put a coffin dam across the water to flood the water up and take a barge, and if it put the grain or whatever they were shipping on that barge, if it only went 3 miles, it was faster than going by wagon and horses because the roadways were so bad. And from there they were loaded back on and go somewhere else where they get deep water. But the workforce was they had so many people here working. I mean, every canal, you figure they built, I don't know how many canal boats, and a lot of them were built for a canal up there. And they were built by slaves. Pennsylvania had slaves, but they used slaves to build them. But everyone come down here, they couldn't take them back up the river. They tore them apart and built the houses out of them, or built boats out of them. They used all the timber. and that's what they did with the ponds. And then, of course, now everything grew back to hardwood and things like that. But they shipped, I had records that I gave them to Susquehanna Historical Society. I got from the Barneses. Even back in 1863, everybody, if they went out on here, they know where the battery was. The lighthouse is on a battery. Well, that was a big fish complex. It was all built up and they raised shad and herring there. The water was so fresh they could raise them. They raised them because they knew they had to replenish them. And they did. There was a big fish hatchery right at Charlestown, the Barnes had. And they knew if they took fish out, they had to replenish them. So they built, and the water was clear, because I worked on a project in '53 at Abbott's Wharf, and we would take a roe shad when it was ready to spawn it and put melt on it. And we used to make little fish boxes about this side and put cheesecloth on them. And then 6 weeks, there'd be fingerlings. We just took the boat hook like that and they swam out. We'd do it again during the whole season. But the river was pure. Now nothing will grow in this river. I mean, I haven't seen I've seen one muskrat this year in this river. And anywhere you used to see a water hole, there'd be a muskrat growing in there. You don't see it anymore. It's a shame. But this was a great project I worked on because it served the history, the Upper Bay Museum, and you have, we're fortunate in Maryland to have what we have. We've got a great waterway, and it gives a lot of pleasure to people and everything. But way back, in Baltimore City alone, because that's where all the industry was, in the cities. That's why they built row houses. Everybody worked in town. The companies were in town. Then after the Second World War, they started building out of town factories and stuff. And the people started moving out in the country and stuff. And then what happened, they become slums and stuff because the industry's not in town anymore. But they built outside. Well, now you see these industrial parks everywhere, especially since they built the road system we have 95. I mean, when you can get you take in 2 days from Louisiana to Fulton Fish Market, a truckload of fish can come up there in 2 days, or shrimp. It's unbelievable. They just changed drivers. One guy will drive it to North Carolina or whatever, or Georgia, and another guy pick it up. And it's unbelievable to get stuff to the market.
When did you get started making decoys, and with who?
Well, the neighborhood I was raised at, they were all hunters. And my uncle was a gunner and had a gun and scow and everything. And you could gun anywhere, up the river, anywhere. There was ducks everywhere. So, of course, Harry Jobs lived right up the alley from me with his grandparents. And we were always on the water doing something, but we weren't allowed to have guns. And then when we were 14, we went and bought our own guns. We'd go to Murray Lauder and get him he had a second floor, he just had, any gun you wanted, people would bring them in there, and we could get a gun from him, and we had to bring him ducks back to pay for them. Or shells, he sells nickel shell, or $2 a box, so I said I'd take a box, but I'll just only take 5 with me. But Murray Lauder was a man, he had a general store in Havre de Grace, but he had all the hay barns at the racetrack, for the horses and stuff. And Murray owned a lot of property in Havre de Grace. And he was good to the town because he's helped a lot of people. But when I was a kid, there were plenty of ducks still around because of the fishermen dumping that corn over, and they were coming here for that feed on that corn. Well, I was 14, and I just moved from. I lived born and raised on Stoke Street, and Dr. Steiner, doctor in Havre de Grace, delivered all of us. There were 6 of us. My brother was named after him, and he would come to my mother after he went to the hospital every day. He'd come to my mother for breakfast, and with my grandfather. My grandfather would come up to have breakfast because he was staying with his daughter down across from Bob McGraw's house, and so of course I was going. Nelson Bernard was 4 doors from me. I was up in his shop, Johnny Boyd, he made some decoy pigtails and stuff up in the loft. They had a carriage house there and a big family. But I went down I was working for Jim Courier. We were working at Mitchell's, but Jim would let me, when I was 14, he hired me to help deliver parcel post during Christmas time because they would be real busy. And then in the spring of the year when we got everybody ordered rabbits and chickens for their, because everybody had a chicken house in their yard and everything like that. And I would work there. Then when I was 16, I could drive. Well, then on Saturday, he let me drive the parcel post truck during the off season because everybody worked for the post office could only work 40 hours. They had to have comp time. They couldn't get no overtime at all. And then you had to wait till somebody died to get a job. So I started going down Mitchell's. I was 14. I stopped around Ed Sampson, knew Ed, the family, the boys and stuff. See Ed and Ed working on heads and stuff. So I went down Mitchell's, and Bill says, "Here, you're not going to stand around. Get that broom and start sweeping up." They start sweeping up. Next thing they put a spoke shave in your hand, spoke shave is duck. And then I started working for Mitchell, and then of course Jim was always making decoys as parts for something to do, And his shop was right down here in the alley right here where they built this house. And of course, when I got out of school, I spent a year at the post office because I got out of school and I had my license and everything. And when I was working down at Mitchell's, and Jim says, "I need a substitute carrier." Well, Mitchell got mad at him because I was working for Mitchell making decoys all year, you know what I mean? And we're doing cripples and everything. So I went to work for Jim for 87 cents an hour at the post office. I was only making 50 cents at Mitchell's. So we had 5 mail routes in Havre de Grace. So my job was Monday I carry 1 route, Tuesday, because they had to have a day off, comp time. And then Saturday, I run the parcel. Well, I was making time and a half. I was making more money than the regular mailmen, and they were getting mad because they couldn't work in it. Well, but I could work because of part-time help. Well, I went down and took a test. I passed it, but you had to wait till somebody died. I'm not kidding you, in the post office then, because that was a lifetime job. So one day, Abe Davis, he worked for a phone company, and Billy Bauer said, "Hey, Jim," because I put an application for a phone company, he said, "We got a job open, go out and see Bill Seitz." So I went out to telephone exchange. Well, telephone exchange was right next to where I lived on Franklin Street, where I had my decoy shop. And everybody sat on my porch. Telephone exchange was right on Stoke Street then. So I saw Billy, and he says, "I need somebody to drive a truck, deliver phones and stuff to different COs like Churchville, Darlington, the small exchanges, because they had guys just, there." So I said, but I can't come to work now. This is October. He says, why? He says, I got to have 2 weeks off. 2 weeks off for what? You ain't got a job yet. I said, well, I don't care if I get a job or not, but I'm going hunting the first 2 weeks. And I did. So then after come in on November the 9th, and it was Harry Lingenfellow, my brother, Emerson Mitchell. We had what we call Orange Chief. We bushwhacked. We used to gun for just 2 weeks, stay out there, come in at night and stuff like that, but we still gunned for 2 weeks straight. So I took my 2 weeks gun, and so then I went to work for a phone company, and I said, well, I'm telling you what, I don't know if I get 2 weeks next year or not, but I'm taking 2 weeks next week when gun season comes in. And from then on, I did. But that's how I got gunning. But my uncle gunned, and he lived on a boat. He had the King Tut gunning scow, and him and Wright's Trailer Park. His father had a farm down there. Those two gunned together, back sink box days and everything. Well, he had opened the hatch up. There was 500 decoys down there. If you wanted a decoy, you just took them. The old strings on them. They break cotton strings and stuff. So if it floated away, you could go in there and get another one. But there were so many decoys around here because I went to work for a phone company. I worked there for a year, and then I was 22 and I got drafted in the service. So then what happened is, I got sent down to boot camp, went through there. Well, then I was in the Signal Corps. So they were going to send me to Fort Benning. Well, another fellow was in school taking training. We came up to get our orders, and a fellow he knew he went to college with was there, a boy he was going to college with. And he was from Connecticut. He says, Mac, what are you doing? He says, yeah, they put me in a signal school. He says, we're supposed to go, order says we're going to go to Fort Benning. Why, you want them changed? We said, yeah, we're as close as we can get to home. He said, Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. So he changed our order, so I went to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey for 15 weeks signal school. And that's how come I knew Summers Headley because he used to come to Madison Mitchell's shop, and he was and Johnny Hillman. They're probably the two largest decoy collectors around, and Norris Pratt. They really had some collections, but and then I was working away when I was with a phone company. I was pickup man. I go to Lynn and Steve Ward's shop. I go to Cigar Daisy and pick birds up. They wouldn't have to dry down because the roads weren't that good. So I was a pickup man. And for Mort Kramer, like that, because they were always dealing in decoys. Well, anyhow, when I went to Europe, I went to Washington, the Pentagon. I said, man, I got it made. I was down there for 2 weeks just getting home myself around. I started to come down, called my MOS, you're going to Stuttgart, Germany. So I said, report to Fort Dix. So I went to Fort Dix. Guy says, you ain't shipped me out for 2 weeks, go on home. So I went on home. I spent 2 weeks home. Then when I was in signal school, we went to school 4 o'clock to 12 o'clock at night. 8 o'clock was dinner time because it was 24/7 the schools were running. And they were all civilian instructors. So on Friday night, you took a phase test, and if you failed, you dropped back one course. If you failed, then you're out altogether. Well, every Thursday night, everybody took the phase test, and you got done 8 o'clock. Well, we could leave at 8 o'clock. Well, I would leave at 8 o'clock, stop at Colt's Neck, there's a bar room right at the front gate, pick up 8 pony roller rocks, and that would last me to get down to the Lighthouse Inn. It was Lighthouse Inn then. Down here at the Lighthouse when it was a bar room. And I'd get there at 7:15, and everybody would be in there watching Gunsmoke on Friday night. And that was my routine for the 15 weeks. So then I ended up going to Germany, and I worked in embassies. I visited 23 countries. I was very fortunate, 23 countries. And I have a brother that was in the Air Force, and he would fly over twice a month, and he'd fly into, and he brought me. Those guys in the Air Force, they would fly to Newfoundland, pick up lobster. We have a lobster bait. They want a steak. They went to Texas. They got steak. I wanted crabs. They got crabs from Sambo's over in Delaware. Put them on a plane and fly them over there. We had parties all the time. But I was very good, you know. I mean, I had pretty good. But then when they wanted you to sign back up, I said, no, I already got a job with a phone company, and I come back here. Well, then that's when I started really getting, because of back with the phone company, we had cedar poles everywhere, you know. I mean, we were replacing cedar poles. We were put back in the 20s and 30s, you know, replaced them. So I was getting all the cedar poles. I wanted to make decoys. So I built my own shop, my brother and I was turning the decoys on Mitchell's lathe, but carving my own heads and putting them together and everything on Stoke Street, but still working for Mitchell's. Well, I spent 17 years at Mitchell's helping me, and I even helped him after that, even, you know, going out on Saturday and head and stuff like that. But I always liked to hunt and fish. Well, when I got married in 55, and I was going with my wife, I said, well, there's one thing I like to do, and that's hunt and fish. And you're not going to interfere with that. And she'll tell you right now that that's what I told her. And she never interfered with it. Because I hunted and fished, and I only worked till I was 55. I had put enough money away, and I had a little construction company. I made a few dollars, and I invested it. And I had enough to live on, and I got in the decoy business. But then 5 days a week or better, I went hunting and fishing. And then when Charlie Bryan retired, him and I didn't all you had to do is pick the phone up and call Charlie. He says, we're going fishing tomorrow. He says, where at, when? That's all he ever said, where at, when? And he'd be there an hour before you. And we used to go, when dove season come in, we'd gone down to St. Michael's a lot because we had friends down there. I had a place down there. So we'd gone all those estates down there. Well, of course, our friend, Kenny Bryant, he had a nursery business, but he took care of all the estates down there. I mean, Caterpillar, tractor, you name it. Pat will tell you, right off the greens, we've shot geese. Renegade and all us, we'd gone down there. Well, you could shoot as much as you want. And Kenny used to say, of course, he was a multimillionaire. He said, he says, whatever your pocketbook can afford. I said, it's not what my pocketbook can afford. It's what your pocketbook can afford. But, you know, and so we gunned down there. And then, I mean, I had a good decoy business going, and I had fellows working for me, helping me and everything. But then when my son Charles, he had finished college up in 91, and he came home, he says, I'm not going back to school. He's going to go get another degree, you know, more on his degree. So he had a degree in corporation management and finances and everything. So he says, I'm going to stay here and make ducks with my dad for a year. Well, he's been there ever since. And he's a good decoy maker. He can do it all. He is one of fun. I'm not kidding you. But when we've had a lot of fun because he's done we got to go fishing together. We hunted together. We dove shot. We did everything together. And we're just, you know, and we've had a great relationship. And then, of course, J.K. used to like to hunt. Well, he doesn't. Because he was a dirt man. He rather dig in dirt and he works construction, you know. But so that's how I got into the decoy business, because there was a way for me to subsidize my income, and we made decoys for the rich man. The poor man made his own decoy. You like your dad, he'd take the cedar poles down and get them turned. Mitchell, make me some decoys. And that's how he got his decoys. But I mean, the rich man come up there in September and wanted his decoys. We put them in the back of his car, and he paid Mitchell for decoys because the local guys would get Mitchell to turn them and get Bailey Moats or anybody to hit them, and Elmer Simper, anybody would paint them. I used to go in basements and paint people's ducks after the season for next year. Well, that's the way it was because you couldn't find a place to gun from Conoway Dam to Cape Charles on either side of the bay back in those days. I mean, there was guys hunting everywhere. And of course, the western shore was a lot of sandy bottoms, so they didn't have a whole lot of grass except certain places. So they all baited. I was gunned down Annapolis with a doctor, or a doctor and a lawyer, and a friend owned a filling station that did work for a telephone company and everything. We were down there blind and shooting mallards. And of course, they had corn down there. Well, then a DNR come there and they dredged. They found one pebble of corn. And he says, "You guys are baiting," so he gave us tickets. So it was about 2 months before we went to court. So we go to court. Well, here comes John, the lawyer. Here he comes with 3 mallards on his back. Come in, and he says, "Judge," he says, "they got us. They said we were baiting." He says, "But we're shooting mallards. And everything. That's all we're getting." And he says, mallards always got corn in them." And he took that mallard, went like that. Corn just rolled out of his mouth. The judge says, "Case dismissed." Yeah, he showed him there. He said, "Those ducks could have dropped that corn down there." So I've had a great life doing what I want to do. Anybody got any other questions?
How many decoys do you think you made in your life, Jimmy?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe 70 years of making them. Maybe 500,000. Because I used to, when we were making decoys, we got like Harry, and when we started our own shops and everything, we had other people work for us, just like Mitchell. So during hunting season, you're making 2,000 and 3,000 decoys for people. I mean, these gun clubs around, they buy 500 of this or that. And you couldn't get enough decoys made, really, at the time, because I used to, down on the Potomac River, Mitchell sold them decoys, and Mitchell says, "I can't handle it all, or you start doing it." Well, heck, I used to send them in the fish barrels. Just take fish barrel and put them in a paper bag, put sawdust in them, and then just put a piece of wreath over them and a rim and ship them freight. Because we had the freight train would go out of B&O Railroad had a freight yard, station and everything. And in Pennsylvania, you took them up there and shipped them down there to them. They never got damaged or nobody take them. And in fact, I made them over 600 or 700 decoys every year, 50 of this or 100 of this, that. Then when Charlie got out of school, he was in the shop and a fellow called him, and the fellow was in the flooring business. And he said, "Charlie, I got a bunch of birds of your dad's. You want to buy them?" Well, of course, he was only paying back in like $7.50 a piece. He wanted $200 a piece for them. Charlie said, "What?" Of course, Charlie has paid a lot of money for some of my birds, but Yeah, he wanted $200 a piece for them. But the man ended up having over 600 decoys, but he sold them all. I mean, you know, it's unbelievable what, and there's something you don't, you know, I've been doing this all my life, and everybody else has been interested. Always something comes out of the woodwork, somewhere, someday. You think it's all, you've seen it all, but you don't. You know, it's unbelievable, because I had fellows bring me ducks in the shop. Joey will tell you, people just bring ducks in, and you thought you seen, you know, they're all gone, but they're still in somebody's cellar or loft or something. Not only that, fishing tackle, anything like that, it's still somewhere tucked away, you know. But it's been fun, and the no names that we can't name probably are worth more than ones we do name, because of the makers. You know, we never knew only the makers we knew was by word of mouth and the old timers that told us over the years. And, you know, you've seen, we'll look at a decoy, you can put 10 of us together. Well, that looks like a Holly, but it's got a sandbar's head on it, or this or that, you know, they're mismatched. But that's what happened, because they were a tool to work with. They didn't care if the head got broke. They just cut it off and put a new one on, or patched it up. It had to draw a bird in for them to shoot. They wanted something to eat. You know, and it's like Bob McGall. When he was born, of course, his grandfather owned the island. He owned 700 some acres down on Basutti Island. And he had the ferry that went across. The cut was bigger than what it was there, but he had a ferry that went across there. And of course, he had what they call the upper farm, which became the gun club, and he had a lower farm, and it had orchards and stuff. Well, he had all the gunning rights for that place, all the fishing rights for that place, and everything. Plus he farmed, but he had some money because Bob was raised till he was 3 years old by his grandfather, and his mother lived there. His father had a farm in Aberdeen, farmed it there right where the railroad is. All that was farmland. That was his father's farm. And then when his grandfather died when he was 3 years old, so of course they sold the farm because there was two boys. He had an Uncle Jim, and then his father, who lived in Havre de Grace. So they sold the farm, and back in them days, usually sold them at the train stations because it was too rough, the roads, to go to a buggy to the courthouses and everything. So the auctioneers would always do it at a train station. So the farm bought $17,900. That's what they started a gun club there. I'm trying to think, what's the name of the road that goes up in Aberdeen, where McDonald's and everything, where it used to be a sand and gravel pit and everything. What's the name of that road, Pat?
You talking about Beards Hill Road?
Not Beards Hill.
Paradise?
They used to live right there. I knew one of the granddaughters, because she worked for the phone company. They had built a house there, but her great grandfather bought the farm from down on the island and turned it into a gun club to the government, took it over. But then he moved to Havre de Grace, but he really lived out in Hagerstown, and he was in the National Guard. And he must have been married then because he had a marriage license, and when he got his discharge, his wife's name was on everything, and then they must move back here to her father's house because he got out of the National Guard like 6 months earlier because I know it was a hardship or something. He was working as a shorts man on the side, selling his shorts. Then he moved back to Havre de Grace. Well, then I guess that's when he really got into decoy business because, you know, the Moore family, they were decoy makers. You know, Harry Moore here and his brother and his grandfather, all of them, they were watermen and gunners, sink box gunners. So I guess that's when he started making decoys. Matt Mitchell got into business because when he got out of funeral business, there wasn't nothing to do, so he started to work for Sam Barnes, which they were related. And then Sam died, and Mitchell ended up with his orders to fill, and that's what started Mitchell in his decoy business. Then he had to learn how to paint because Lillian Barnes did all her painting for him years ago, and she got married, moved out. She said, I ain't painting any more decoys. And Captain Billy Moore come down and showed Mitchell how to paint, told him to go down to Bunnings and Baltimore, buy the paints and all that, and showed him. And Bob come down the shop and saw his father-in-law in there showing him how to paint. Well, that was competition. And you know, they lived in the same house for over 5 years and never spoke because of his father-in-law was showing him how to feather and paint ducks. And that was competition.
Decoy makers are weird.
They are weird. There's a lot of them around weird.
They get funny.
Anybody got any other questions?
So Jimmy, you talked about the Bayview, you talked about the furnace building here, and the city selling it for $3,700, or putting it up for sale for $3,700. But you need to tell everybody where you took this building when you got it to where it is today.
Well, it was fun. I mean, it just happened that we had good governor. The building was set here, and when they came and they asked me if I'd do it, I had some friends who were, because I was in the Harsey Construction Company, and I had some friends in Philadelphia I knew, were engineers, and I said, well, let's see what the building will hold. Well, of course, I've been in it when I was a kid. We used to sneak in here and go swim in the swimming pool. This floor right here is all concrete and had netting around. It was a badminton court and tennis ball court, and the women's sun buddies up here. They came up the steps up there and it had drains all in it. Well, I brought the engineering company down and we dug around a footer and everything. He says, yeah, these footers are good. It's good concrete and everything. They walked underneath you can go underneath the swimming pool where it is. Check that. Well, then JK and my boys and my nephew and all us, we got from Harbor had the boatyard up there. We hauled, how many ton was it, JK?
We got 15, it was 15 ton. I went out to the block company, remember, and I got the pallets of concrete.
Yeah,
and I brought the crane down here and we set it up on we had to set it up on the beams.
Right up here, over there where the beam was, where the Government Flats is, they put a scalp up there and put a scale on there, and we put 15 ton of concrete right on a spot they set for us, and that steel went down, and they measured it, and it went back up, so it was strong. And when they read and did the rule book and all that, and he said, you can put 5 stories on this building if you wanted to. That's how strong it was. And this was all hand poured, the steel and everything. So then we started on it, and of course, Mitchell was behind it a lot, and of course we had a good mayor, a good governor, and Ari Rearman, and we had good, John Cox and all his boys. They all were for us and helped us. Well, we put in for a grant. When we started, we put the first decoy show on. And we started this thing in 80, but we never put a first decoy show on in 81. It was very successful. And it was, of course, we were just using the Catholic Church the basement in the school we're using, the high school and everything, and it just kept expanding. And then next thing we're in all the schools, and we were like, then what happened there was we started having Friday night parties. And of course my brother, Bob Gall, and some of the fellows in town would do all the cooking and stuff. We had it at the far house, and it just got so, we were selling out, 300 people would come to the thing. We had plenty to eat, and you name it. And it grew, and then when we got the first floor done, which I was very fortunate. They let me do the project, but the city was overseeing it, and but we were writing our own checks, through the city on it. So of course I begged, borrowed, and stealed everything I could. I mean, I had some good friends like Carty Turner, Phil Powell, Kenny Stevens. He was my concrete man, and these fellows I used them all. And then I had Flip Wilson. He just passed away, and he did a lot of work downstairs. And I was buying white pine, just white pine floor, and some of the stuff. I got that from Kush Brothers, got a deal with them in white pine, and they were making log homes and everything. So they gave it to me at cost, and brought it down here for me, because I knew I didn't know very well. And we put white pine floor in here, but the high heels made it rusty looking. But it's been a great project. But Donald Schaefer, he's behind it. We went to see him with Bill Cox and everything, and we put in for a $500,000 grant, $500,000. And that's what he told us to. He said, but you're only going to get about 300 or 375,000. So that's what they gave us. They gave us 375,000. Well, we did the first floor and got it all finished. And I was fortunate because I was selling decoys to Gypsum, U.S. Gypsum Company. The president was in Dallas, and he'd gone with some friends of mine. Bob Bell was Savannah National Bank president, and they'd come down to South America. And they used to call me and I used to have to send cinnamon teal to them, and blue wings and pintails, 18 each every year. I just mailed them to them, they'd pay me and everything. So I called him up, I says, oh, I need some drywall. He says, drywall, how many sheets do you need? I says, I don't know. Building's this size. He said, well, go see Chuck. And he knew Chuck Lay, Donald, a fellow in Havre de Grace I knew, family was here. Donald's brother worked with me, so I went to see Chuck, and he was in drywall business, selling drywall, all these developments and stuff like that. So he come and measured and says, yeah, we'll bring a tractor trailer load. So he did, and he brought it over there. He says, who's going to put it up? I said, I don't know. So he said, well, I got a friend. The fellow was in the drywall business, finishing business. He had like 75 people working for him, but he was making 50 cents a sheet and not even touching it. And these developments all over the state of Maryland, Washington, and everything. And they were selling drywall and that. So I went to Clarky Turner. I said, Clarky, you know all the lumber yards. I think it was 482 by 6s to frame the walls up downstairs. We had to, because it was just a concrete building. And I got all of that for nothing. So I had fellows, my nephew and them, they framed it up, Phil Powell and all of them, got it framed. And then I went to a party up this with Larry Grace. He said, come on, you're on this party. Well, this man was in the drywall business. He says, yeah, Chuck told me about it. You wanted to hum and finish. They did. They come in here and hung in and finished and cost a cent either. So then I needed to paint it. So What I did, I used to have a fellow work for me up in the decoy shop. He lived up in Elton, and he came here when Castro took over Cuba, Gomez, and he family settled up in Elton and Newark because they went to work for General Motors. But his grandfather was a big contractor. They took all his money and everything. They came to this country with nothing. And Henry was he worked for Bill Pease. He worked for me in the shop, and he was good. And he carved now a little bit or anything. But he says, who's going to paint it? Him and his brother did painting on the side, you know, when they didn't have anything to do. And he says, why don't you come up to the company? We got 35 men come there every day, just sits in the break room in case somebody gets sick on the line, you know what I mean? Because it's all you. So I went up there and saw their boss and says, how many boys you need? I said, well, I don't know, tell Henry. So Henry says, well, I'm really going to need 5 of us to paint this place. Well, I went and every paint dealer I dealt with, and I got paint from everybody I could. You know, they got white, and then they painted cream, they painted over. Well, they painted this whole building out. It didn't cost us $1 cent either because I just used what I could. So they just couldn't wait on this downstairs part. Well, we got the downstairs part all up, and of course we built Mitchell's shop in there. There was a step up in there where they used to have a car wash, and we built Mitchell's Bob McGraw's shop in that area. And of course then when we remodeled it, they took that all out and changed it all around. But they just couldn't believe what we did with $375,000, made $1 million building. Well, then we didn't have enough space, so I said, we need to put a second floor over here, so we go to Donald Services. So I already got called around and to Armco and different ones, and Gulf State out of Mississippi gave me the best price was I don't know, $70-some thousand. The engineer, I wanted an engineer, you know, to put support beams where they were and put the building up. Well, they did. They came up and put it all together for us, and then we finished the inside. I did the same thing. I needed 2 or 4, 2 or 6s, and then we built most of the cases ourselves in here, except for the glass cases. But I built those cases there, Mitchell's case there, and then, of course, we ended up putting the stained glass windows all around, and we made money off of that because we had a person doing it, and everybody wanted to put one in honor of somebody in here, you know, Charlie Bryan or father and stuff, so we ended up putting all the stained glass windows. And then, of course, it's been very successful because I said one thing when I got involved, the museum's going to stay open 7 days a week. And he said, what? I said, yes. I said, I'll tell you what. Because when I was younger, my wife and I traveled a lot, and I loved to go to museums. And I'd go to these museums, they're closed. Open Friday, 2 o'clock. Open Saturday, 1 o'clock. Well, people are traveling every day. They could be there on Wednesday. So I said, you keep the doors open. And I'll say one thing. I mean, we've had some tough times here. Pat, I'll tell you, because Pat was been president here. He took over after I left here, and Doc Carey and everybody. And he and Jeannie's done a great job. But it takes a lot of money to keep this place open. But the doors have never been closed. People can come here anytime and get in here. And that's the best part about a museum, is it being open. I mean, you might not only get one customer a week, but if you want them to come and see what you got there, you got to be open. And that's the problem with the Upper Bay Museum now. That's a shame, because when I got involved with that, and it's a very fine museum because it's a water museum. It's got fishing nets, everything, and they've done a great job on it. But they don't have the support of the town and the people to keep it open. And it should be open because it's a very fine Museum too. You know, and of course, you can have St. Michael's, you got the Maritime Museum there, of course, they got a lot of heavy pockets down there. So they really did something. I remember you could bought half the land down there for $10,000 when it was a fishing village. Now you can't even touch a half place to put a tombstone for that.
Yeah.
But it's been interesting.
Do we have other questions, or we are at 8:15? So, are there other questions? Burning questions for Mr. Peters?
How about we close with one of your most famous and funniest, most enjoyable gunning stories, Jimmy?
Bear.
That was the last night I got. No, back then, we only had one game warden in town, and he had the canvas back, a boat, it had tunnel stern, so it could run across the grass and everything. And of course, when it froze up, he come and lived in the Bayou Apartments there. It was Odin King. He was an outlaw back in his day, you know. His whole family were King family, you know, they were commercial fishermen and gunner and everything. Well, anyhow, of course, back then they kept the boat in the boathouse down there. The dock was still there, and he lived on the battery during the hunting season. Stayed right on the battery, him and his wife. I mean, he had everything there, quarters. But then we had a sanctuary pole up where he couldn't gun a certain place in the battery and stuff, so the ducks could rest and stuff like that. Well, then, Odin wouldn't bother anybody, you know, about if you had a good day, you shot. The other day, you didn't get any ducks, you know. I mean, it wasn't, some days you did and some days you didn't. Well, anyhow, I'd gun off the battery and just leave a couple pair of canvasbacks hanging there. He knew where they came from. When he was living in the Bayou, we killed ducks. Always left him a few pair of ducks. Because every lawyer, doctor and everything wanted canvasbacks in. And the judge wasn't going to lock you up because we were feeding him. Yeah, I mean, I kid you, and we killed, I mean, the old timers killed, it was a rough life, but when we were gunning, we had it easy because we had automatic shotguns. You know, they didn't have all this. And we had extensions on them, and I could take 3 guns, and we killed 99, I don't know how many birds we killed, but we picked up 99 birds. We wouldn't pick up the other one because I said it would be bad luck for 100. Gilbert Wyatt and Bobby Walker and myself up underneath the B&O Railroad Bridge. And we had a fellow there who was railroad cops used to walk, they used to walk the railroad bridge all the time, back and forth. And this was during the Cold War was going on and stuff, you know. So he was there waiting, what are you boys doing down there? Get out of here. Philip said, we're going to get out of here. And he just shot up in the air. He left. But we picked up 99 canvasbacks that night. Wow. And got $7 a pair. We were rolling in money. But I mean, but there was ducks. I mean, I've seen some nights be 3 or 4 gunning parties out there. You can just see the flashes because they were on corn. They're feeding on because the fishermen dumping corn over. Now, until the state of Maryland got real strict. And I know when Pat and them all boys, that whole group gunning.
Come on now.
I seen a fire come out of the barrel at night. All night. And you get out there next day, and you thought it was a flower garden was red. But I mean, you did it because that was just a way of life. That's what you did, you know. Because like Ronnie Adams, I mean, he's really found some history about all the gunning. and amusement parks around. I mean, because people didn't have the entertainment stuff like that. They all worked in the city, and I used to always say, when I was young, up there in Lapidum and Conway Dam, on Friday nights and Saturdays and Sundays, you couldn't find a rock to stand on for people dipping herring and fishing. And I used to say, them damn dumb Pennsylvania, what the hell are they, rain or shine? They made them. Well, then I found out, when you go up there and you live in row houses, no yards or anything, and you just work everywhere, you wanted to get out of town. And that was their pleasure, was fishing. And, you know, that's the same way in Baltimore. There was a lot of amusement parks right in Baltimore, a lot of, I mean, they're just local places where people made a living doing it, because that's the only entertainment we had. But now you get on a plane, go anywhere you want.
All right, Jimmy. We thank you.